In March 1978, on a small blue-green planet far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy, a group of primitive ape-descended life forms created and performed a groundbreaking new radio show. It distracted listeners from their Sinclair pocket calculators and those neat digital watches, and went on to spawn best-selling books, theatre productions, a TV series, and even a movie. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is 40 years old, and it all started here on Radio 4.
6 pints of bitter, and quickly, please, the world's about to end.
Oh, yes, sir. Nice weather for it. Going to watch the match this afternoon, sir?
No point.
Foregone conclusion, you reckon, sir? Arsenal without a chance?
No, it's just that the world's going to end.
Oh, yes, sir, you said. Lucky escape for Arsenal if it did.
No, not really.
There you are, sir. 6 points.
Keep the change.
What, from a fiver? Thank you, sir.
You've got 10 minutes left to spend it.
Ford, would you please tell me what the hell is going on?
Drink up, you've got 3 pints to get through.
3 at lunchtime?
Time is an illusion. Lunchtime doubly so.
Very deep.
Part of the opening scene from Episode 1 of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, first broadcast in March 1978.
To tell the story of the book, it's best to tell the story of some of the minds behind it. A human from the planet Earth was one of them, though as our story opens, he no more knows his destiny than a tea leaf knows the history of the East India Company.
Douglas and I were at university together, though in different colleges, and we started out as rivals, but then became, after coming down from university, very close friends. We shared a flat together and then a rented house, and spent a lot of time in the evenings writing together. So it was natural that when he got stuck 2/3 of the way through writing the first series of Hitchhiker, I helped him out with some of the jokes.
I won't enjoy it.
Oh, yes, you will. There's a whole new life stretching out in front of you.
Oh, not another one.
Will you shut up and listen? This time there's going to be excitement and adventure and really wild things.
Sounds awful.
Marvin, all I'm trying to say...
I suppose you want me to open this spaceship for
Marvin,
you.
just listen, will you? What?
I suppose you want me to open this spaceship for you.
Yeah, that'd be...
Well, I wish you'd just tell me rather than trying to engage my enthusiasm because I haven't got one.
Hey, how'd you do that, Marvin?
Didn't I tell you I've got a brain the size of a planet? No one ever listens to me.
In 2001, we were all shocked and dismayed when Douglas died suddenly of a heart attack. He was terribly young at just 49. Since then, his private papers have been donated to the library of his old Cambridge College, St John's, and we've been given access to them for this programme. It's a remarkable collection of scrappy old notebooks and pieces of paper that include priceless unrecorded Hitchhiker's Guide scenes, musings, and bits of unfinished books. Writing didn't come easy to Douglas, and this note he wrote to himself is a window into his state of mind on the subject. General note to myself. Writing isn't so bad, really, when you get through the worry. Forget about the worry. Just press on. Don't be embarrassed about the bad bits. Don't strain at them. Give yourself time. You can come back and do it again in the light of what you discover about the story later on. It's better to have pages and pages of material to work with and sift, and maybe find an unexpected shape in that you can then craft and put to good use, rather than one manically reworked paragraph or sentence. But writing can be good. You attack it, don't let it attack you. You can get pleasure out of it. You can certainly do very well for yourself with it. On March the 8th this year, a new series of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, The Hexagonal Phase, goes out on Radio 4, based on the novel And Another Thing by Owen Colfer.
Can I help you?
If you can, it'll be a first.
Marvin!
Don't stand up. I'm not worth the bother.
Dirk Maggs adapted the novel for the series and has very cleverly included new material by Douglas Adams, unearthed from the St John's archive.
It is you, isn't it?
Oh, it's me, all right. Can't you tell?
It wasn't so much the change in appearance as the irrepressible jollity that was throwing me.
Just because I'm 10,000 times more intelligent than you think that every time I make a remark I'm trying to make you feel miserable.
No, I don't.
Well, you should do, because I am.
It's not homogenised in terms of its format. It's everything from basically recycled school exercise books up to and including hard drives.
One thing that really speaks to me is the format, as you say, which is these are typed on old-fashioned, probably stolen BBC typewriters, and they've got all those crossings out and snowpake, It takes you right back to the 70s. We've forgotten how old-fashioned the technology was, now that everyone has a word processor and so on. One of the things the archive throws up is all these notes to himself, saying things like, frankly, at the moment, I couldn't care because I'm sitting here at 2 o'clock in the bloody morning trying to get this right. So if anybody tries to be pedantic with me, they'll get a clock on the nose.
And what also I love about it is that it's putting into practice the writer's dictum, which says just write down anything that's going through your head at that point and sort it out later. And that's what's so fascinating about the notes. Sometimes you'll see him try something 2 or 3 times and then start criticising himself in the text of the note. He doesn't even walk away to make a cup of tea. He's sitting there and he starts typing this.
The cast of the hexagonal phase were telling me that because the script is peppered with genuine Douglasisms from the hand of the master, unannotated, unchanged, is that those bits were marked in the script so that the bits that you wrote or Owen wrote, you could change if you wanted to make it better or faster or crisper, but the Douglas stuff was holy writ.
Exactly, yes. I was really doing that to remind myself where I couldn't touch stuff, and that, although having said that, of course, there were some adjustments, but on the whole, I'll always take notes from the cast because they were there at the beginning and I wasn't. So if somebody says to me, and Mark has said this to me, Zaphod wouldn't say that, then I'll quickly change the line.
Insults are my vocation. I am Wowbagger, the infinitely prolonged.
I am Zaphod Beeblebrox. My father was Zaphod Beeblebrox II. My grandfather, Zaphod Beeblebrox III.
That makes no sense.
There was an accident with a contraceptive and a time machine.
My word is worth something in this galaxy. I promise to have you killed, and so I shall.
One of the things the archive shows up is that Douglas was such a sort of troubled person. He found writing so difficult.
I think you're absolutely right. This bloke isn't finding this easy. He's really searching deeply for ways to top what he's done already, to make it better. And you've got to admire that. And I think there are moments, we laughed at what you read out just now, his note to himself, but actually you can sense that he's on the brink of the abyss at that point.
As you know, combing through the archive, you get a strong sense of the kind of bipolarity of Douglas. These moments of fantastic joy when he discovers a thread, a seam that he can mine, and then these notes of absolute despair and anguish that he's got stuck again. And I think one of the things I remember about Douglas with the books particularly is that he would have this steep learning curve up to actually delivering the book, which should usually spend most of the year on the first paragraph of the book, and then write the whole thing in 3 weeks. I think in a strange way, what Douglas was doing, which I think ultimately all writers are doing, is sort of channeling some higher consciousness, deeper consciousness, some subconscious thing, and that the really wonderful stuff often that Douglas wrote, apart from the brilliant first paragraph, which is always marvellous, was that you're actually opening yourself to something which you perhaps can't do merely by effort.
When, in his later years, Dr. Skillery Hailstranter, the Stellarius Professor of Paradoxical Anomalism at the University of Maximegalon, studied the known data on Arthur Dent, he was at first bewildered. Then he considered the problem from a fresh angle and became utterly bewildered. And then, late one night, a stark cry of horrified realization was heard from his room. He was later seen striding around the streets, winking and nodding at the sky and shouting, "Nice one, God, nice one."
Interestingly, going through his papers, there's an alternative opening to The Top of Life, the Universe and Everything, the third novel, which covers something like 8 or 9 pages of A4, and is this very elaborate and rather elegant philosophical treatise on the universe and the nature of our place in it, which at the very end just takes this huge tapestry and weaves it down to one thread, which is Arthur Dent screaming as he wakes up in a cave in prehistoric Finchley or whatever it is, and he just cuts it, and the first thing in the book is after they don't woke up with a scream. He cuts this whole opening. It's not good enough to go in, and yet reading it, you're completely captivated.
Well, one of the great dicta of Douglas Adams is, any fool can write, but only a writer can cut. And I think that is such a great insight, is learning to edit yourself is the real business. Rewriting is the business of writing, actually. Anybody can put pen to paper, but somebody can look at it as if they're an outsider and change it. And Douglas was a master at that, actually. The pain was considerable, but he always did it in the end.
Sometimes he cut stuff that I personally would love to have read or to have heard.
Douglas gave hundreds of interviews throughout his brief career and told and retold stories of the early days of hitchhikers. In this archive BBC interview, he told the tale of how he came to get the big idea in the first place.
What became the radio series started out as a completely different thing, which was going to be a series of different stories, each of which concluded with the world coming to an end for a different reason. But as I was working away on the story, it needed to have some kind of perspective on it. You needed to see these events from the point of view of somebody who knew the bigger picture, so to speak. And so I thought, well, what I need is some alien creature who's here on Earth, knows this is going on, but is incognito. And then I suddenly remembered this thing from years earlier. So I thought that he should be a roving reporter for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I was lying drunk in a field in Innsbruck, and I can never remember if it was 1970 or 71, and I had a copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe, and I remember lying there looking up at the stars, and just crossed my mind that somebody ought to write a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as well. It didn't even occur to me it would be me. It just seemed like a good title and that somebody should use it.
Douglas told the story of inspiration in the stars so often that he later said he can only remember the story and didn't recall the actual event. This is how he remembered getting BBC Radio interested in the idea of a sci-fi comedy. It was February 1977, and he was in a meeting with a young producer called Simon Brett.
I had been trying for a long, long time to get the idea of science fiction comedy off the ground. And most people weren't interested. Most producers weren't interested. I mean, you'd say science fiction comedy, and if you went to a comedy producer, they'd say, "Oh, that sounds like drama." And you go to a drama producer, and they'd say, sounds like comedy, you see. Can't do it. But I was convinced that there was something here. And I'd more or less given up the idea in the end. Eventually Simon Brett asked me to come and see him and said, "What ideas have you got?" So I sort of went through all these various ramifications of different ideas, and he said, yes. And then said at the end of about an hour, he said, "What I would really like to do," he said, "is something like science fiction comedy." Whereupon I sort of practically fell off my chair, and the whole idea came together in about 24 hours after that.
And here's Simon Brett.
Well, sadly, he's not here to argue with. That is not my recollection. I mean, I'd be surprised if I said that, because I didn't know much about science fiction. I'm sure maybe it wasn't actually in an outline, but he must have mentioned, various ideas and a science fiction comedy, and I said, I like the sound of that. That would be the way I would see it. But who knows? History is an imperfect science.
After the meeting, Simon Brett persuaded his bosses in BBC Radio Light Entertainment to commission a script from Douglas for this science fiction comedy. It hadn't been an easy idea to pitch to them for many reasons.
There really hadn't been much comic science fiction. I suppose you could say Gulliver's Travels is comic science fiction and Erewhon by Samuel Butler is comic science fiction. But not in the way that we understand it. There was no Terry Pratchett. There was, so it was quite an original idea in that sense. And also, the fact that there was no audience was another big change. So it was already quite different. And then the sort of sound effects and that whole world it was going into was, I can't really see a previous generation. And the kind of wackiness, if you like, was a very different wackiness from, say, The Goon Show. The Goon Show was sort of anarchic about everything, but Douglas, there was a kind of logic going through his alternative universe.
You can have the greatest idea in the world, but if it comes to you at the wrong time, you might as well forget it. Leonardo da Vinci invented the helicopter, but he couldn't build it. Douglas's timing was pretty good, because in 1977, news was reaching the UK of a new movie that was breaking box office records in the States.
If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
20th Century Fox presents the most extraordinary motion picture of all time, Star Wars.
Here's where the fun begins.
The BBC, I think, thought that with the success of Star Wars and things, there might be a market for science fiction. I don't know why they were so slow. They'd done Journey into Space years ago and all that stuff. And radio is the perfect medium for science fiction because it lets the imagination run riot. You make the suggestions, and the person listening then paints in the scenery. It's absolutely perfect for science fiction. And of course we all know that, but for some reason they didn't seem to tweak it.
Simon Jones, who has starred as Arthur Dent in the radio, TV and stage versions of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Drink up, the world's about to end.
This must be Thursday. I never could get the hang of Thursdays.
Simon Brett and Douglas Adams were determined that this new show would sound very different to the panel shows and sketch shows of before. They wanted it to have great music and out-of-this-world special effects, and for that they needed it in glorious stereo. Amazingly, a BBC comedy had never been done in stereo before.
At all points, Simon was playing quite a sort of deep political game, positioning it so it could sort of get on. For instance, we were told that you could not do comedy in stereo, and here's the reason, which was that the audience wouldn't know which speaker the punchline was going to come out of. So, for a little brief moment in Hitchhiker's history, it was officially a drama, just to get us through that little wrinkle in the system. There was also the issue of it not having an audience. We couldn't possibly have done it in front of an audience. As it turned out, each programme took about a month to make. I can't even remember how Simon won that particular one. Again, it was through knowing the right buttons to push at the right moment, so to speak.
You have to cast your mind back to 1977, if it goes that far back, to understand the genesis of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It was a long time ago, in an entertainment era far, far away.
Enter!
Excuse me, please, lady.
Yes, what is it?
I'm coming here to be learning the English.
You're Alice.
Oh, no, I'm Ali.
Vince Powell's Mind Your Language from London Weekend Television. Meanwhile, Radio 4 was trying out brand new shows, which surely are now long dead, called things like The News Quiz and I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. But joking apart, the BBC of the 1970s was a very different place.
There are a lot of senior producers who'd had very good wars. John Peel said when he joined the BBC, it was all run by ex-fighter pilots. And probably the next youngest producer would have been in his 30s. So, you know, I was, 22 at the time, so we were quite a lot younger. And we were looked to as the people who would be in touch with the latest trends.
The BBC's answer to keeping in touch with the comedy tastes of the general public was to employ privileged young graduates from our two most elite institutions, Oxford and Cambridge universities. I should know, I was one of them.
There wasn't a comedy industry in those days. I mean, now almost every pub in the country has a stand-up night. Then there really wasn't. So you could only look to Oxford or Cambridge, which had a tradition of doing late-night reviews, and that's where they turned for comedy producers and writers. There weren't many people with a kind of showbiz background, actually, in light entertainment. I mean, the joke used to be that, you know, the qualification for being a light entertainment producer was having no sense of humour.
So that's how I got a job at the BBC.
Douglas was always around, and I could recognise that. I mean, there were one or two very good sketches that I knew of Douglas's. There's the failed kamikaze pilot sketch, which is very well known.
You wanted to see me, sir?
Yes, Simpkins. Now, Simpkins, how long have you been a kamikaze pilot?
2 years now, sir.
2 years? And during that time, Simpkins, how many kamikaze missions have you flown?
19, sir.
The failed kamikaze pilot sketch was commissioned by the BBC for a sketch show called The Burkiss Way, though it had already been written and performed as part of A Kick in the Stalls, the 1976 Cambridge University Footlights Revue, which Douglas had directed. Douglas was not a central figure in the Footlights. In fact, there was some resistance to letting him in the club at all. Simon Jones played a key role in opening the door.
Yes, he was in his first year at St John's, and I was in my last year at Trinity Hall. And I was, by that time, by my great seniority and eminence, on the committee of the Footlights. People brought their material, performed it. If the audience thought it was good enough, and particularly the committee, you became a member. That's how you became a member of Footlights. Smoking Room Concerts, I think that was the original title, you know. I tell you who was a regular was Julian Fellows. Wrote many a sketch. But then along came Douglas with two friends, Adam Smith Adams. And I remember the sketch distinctly. It was too silly for words. One of them gave a glass of water to Douglas, who appeared to consume it. The other one then cranked his arm and he spat the water over the person who'd just given him the water, like a water pump. And that actually was basically it, but I laughed immoderately, and everyone looked at me as though I was insane. Well, it was such a relief after all these sort of existential sketches and, riffs on philosophers and, all that intellectual stuff, and this was something that was basically silly. And I thought, yes, fine, get him in. And apparently Douglas heard that I'd gone to bat for him, because there was a certain amount of opposition. They said, oh, come on, that's not exactly writing. I said, no, but it works, you see. And so he got in. And apparently he never forgot.
In the years between Cambridge and Hitchhikers, Douglas came to London to be a comedy writer. We'd become great friends and shared a flat together in West Hampstead and then a rented house in Roehampton. While I worked as a radio producer during the day, Douglas was struggling as a writer, spending a lot of time in the bath, thinking, having cups of tea. One evening I came back from the office and found Douglas out of the bath and sitting on his bed, distraught, almost in tears. He was on the point of giving writing up entirely and moving to Hong Kong to become a shipbroker. But then, suddenly, a few days later, he was commissioned to write the Hitchhiker's Guide pilot. Finally, the break he had so desperately needed. And he didn't forget his mates.
He suddenly called me up and said, are you interested in doing some radio? Of course, I looked at my empty calendar and said, well, I don't know, I might be able to fit it in. What have you got in mind? Well, he said, I've written this character with you in mind. Well, it's you, really. How would you like to do it? And of course, who says no to that sort of offer? So, of course we did it, and I was a little puzzled when I read the script. Who was this man who goes around saying, what? I don't understand. And why can't I get a decent cup of tea? I don't ever remember saying that in his presence. I think it was more an extension of Douglas, actually, projected onto me, but never mind. I don't have to search far in the cupboard for my characterization, if you see what I mean. However it is, 40 years on, and I'm still Arthur Dent.
I haven't drunk my tea yet. Marvin?
Look on the bright side, Arthur.
Ford?
At least you're not lying down in front of a bulldozer, eh?
So Simon Jones became, and still is, Arthur Dent. The roving reporter from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Ford Prefect, would be another Footlights alumnus, Geoffrey McGivern. Now one of our leading comic actors who you've probably seen quite recently in Back or Quacks. And the other key role to fill was the voice of the book itself.
This is the story of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, perhaps the most remarkable, certainly the most successful book ever to come out of the great publishing corporations of Ursa Minor. More popular than the Celestial Home Care Omnibus, better selling than 53 More Things to Do in Zero Gravity, and more controversial than Ulan Kalufid's trilogy of philosophical blockbusters, Where God Went Wrong, Some More of God's Greatest Mistakes, and Who Is This God Person Anyway?
The distinguished comic actor Peter Jones, who was the voice of The Hitchhiker's Guide for the first two series. Over the years, many people, myself included, have told the tale of how Peter came to be cast. The story goes that Douglas and Simon Brett agreed that they needed someone who sounded a bit Peter Jonesy. But after many failed attempts to find someone a bit Peter Jonesy, they settled on Peter Jones. Like other Hitchhiker's tales, getting to the actual truth is not easy, And the man who actually booked Peter Jones, Simon Brett, begs to differ.
The book was my main contribution because I'd worked with Peter Jones and I was working on Just a Minute, where he was a regular with Kenneth Williams, Derek Nemo, Clement Freud and inevitably Nicholas Parsons. I loved working with Peter and I thought he'd got a lovely understated way with a comic line. So I recommended him as the voice and Douglas was happy to go along with that.
Now I can hear anoraks rustling uncomfortably all over the English-speaking world at that change to the official history of hitchhikers, so let's move on.
It was quite funny because I was sat down with my head of department, who was called Con Mahoney, who'd had a very good war in the Marines, and Charles Maxwell, who had had a very good war, and done Take It From Here with Frank Muir and Dennis Norden, and John Simmons, who had a very good war and had done Beyond Our Ken and that kind of stuff. I played the half hour of the pilot to them in total silence. At the end, my boss said to me, "Simon, is it funny?" And I said, "Con, I promise you it is funny." And from that point, he backed it all the way.
So the pilot had worked and a series was commissioned. But in the meantime, Simon Brett had got himself another job at London Weekend Television, and so a new producer had to be found for the series. Up stepped the late lamented Geoffrey Perkins, a close friend of both mine and Douglas's, and another comedy great who was taken from us far too young. Here's Geoffrey, recorded in 2001.
Despite the fact that it looks now as if Douglas had mapped the whole thing out very carefully beforehand, in fact the whole show was written in an incredibly ad hoc way. One of the things that made it special was that actually there wasn't really any method for doing a show like that, and I remember going out for a meal with Douglas just before the first show I did with him and saying to him, "Look, I have to be honest and say I really don't know what I'm doing with the show." And Douglas said, "That's all right, neither do I." So a lot of it was made up as we went along, really.
It isn't always easy being funny, and like many funny writers before him, Douglas went through agonies in the process. We dug out this extract from his private papers. Today I am monumentally fed up with the idea of writing. I haven't actually written anything for 2 days, and that makes me feel fed up as well. I wonder how people will react when I say that I haven't written anything for a while. Fuck! Shock! Horror! What the fuck do you think you're doing? We employ you as a sausage factory. Where are all the bloody sausages? Arthur Dent is a Burke. He does not interest me. Ford is a Burke. He doesn't interest me. Zaphod Beeblebrox is a Burke. He doesn't interest me. Marvin's a Burke. He doesn't interest me. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a Burke. It does not interest me. You could sort of draw a graph of Douglas's year by year, and it'd be more or less exactly the same, which is a book would come out, it'd be a huge success, Douglas would go up like a kite, he'd be right at the top of his game, full of jollity and good humour and going to parties all the time, and he'd get commissioned for a second book, obviously, or a third book or a fourth book. And then he would start off all bushy-tailed and cheerful and get the typewriter out and write the first sentence and think this is going to be amazing, and then it would be very difficult, and the first paragraph would take most of the year. And during that year, he went lower and lower and more depressed and angry and full of desperation, got more and more difficult. He'd be still working on the same first paragraph for most of the year, and then a crisis would occur, and he'd simply have to start writing the book a few weeks before the deadline, either by himself or with a publisher in tow, or just by running away to a foreign country and writing it on a plane. And then it would come out and be a huge success, and just go up like a kite, and you could draw this graph like a sort of upside-down bell curve.
It was produced in a white heat of deadline fever.
Geoffrey McGiven.
And I have to tell you the story of the end of Golga Frincham. The B-Arc have ruined it. And you see in that Douglas's concern about the planet, what we're capable of so stupidly doing. without thinking of the consequences of our actions, but only of our own comfort.
Yes, since we decided a few weeks ago to adopt leaves as legal tender, we have, of course, all become immensely rich.
Yes, really wonderful and about.
But we have also run into a small inflation problem on account of the high level of leaf availability, which means that I gather the current going rate has something like 3 major deciduous forests buying 1 ship's peanuts. So, in order to obviate this problem and effectively revalue the leaf, we are about to embark on an extensive defoliation campaign and, burn down all the forests. I think that's a sensible move, don't you?
That makes economic
You're
absolutely
When he was writing that, we didn't have that scene. And we had no overtime. We had to finish by 6. And at about 10 to 6, Douglas, meanwhile, that afternoon, has been hammering away at the final scene, which is where Ford has this very depressed speech about, look what they've done, how grim this is. We then had these onion skin paper copies. So we had onion skin, which was like crinkly, noisy paper, but it was thin enough to do many copies, handed to us, and we had to sight read it. We didn't even have time to look through it. We had no idea where our parts, who was saying what. We literally held it by the corner so it wouldn't rustle in front of the highly sensitive microphones and read it off the page, and that was it. 6 o'clock, the clock ticked, and that was the end of the session, and it's one of the best scenes in the thing.
He worked so hard.
Simon Jones.
One of his favourite writers was Woodhouse, and Woodhouse would labour for days on particular jokes and refining his text. And Geoffrey Perkins used to really be hesitant about asking Douglas to rewrite a line, because Douglas would say, OK, and then go away and start the whole thing again from scratch. And this was sort of exhausting. And he really wanted a line changed, but Douglas was constantly polishing. He had to labour long and hard when we were doing that first series, because he hadn't quite finished it. And he rushed into the men's room and sat there typing away, and we didn't even know how it was going to finish. It was a bit like Casablanca in that way, I suppose. About episode 4 is when he got a little stuck, and I think that's probably when John Lloyd came along to assist him. Helpful suggestions as to how the plot could resolve itself.
He was in a terrible state, and he said to me, will you help me out? And because we were best friends, and we'd written together lots and lots, unsuccessfully, I have to say, nearly all the time, I said, of course I'll help you out. And it took him about 10 months to write the first 4.5 episodes, and the last 1.5 that we wrote together took us just under 3 weeks. It was very fast, it was very enjoyable. Douglas laughed a lot, he cheered up, he had such fun not carrying all the weight by himself. And we knew each other very well, so we had a very similar sense of humour. It was really good fun and very efficient, and those scripts didn't turn up late.
I read of one planet off in the 7th dimension that got used as a ball in a game of intergalactic bar billiards. Got potted straight into a black hole, killed 10 billion people.
Total madness.
Yeah, only scored 30 points too.
Where did you read that?
Book.
Which book was that?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, that thing.
Producer Geoffrey Perkins coped incredibly calmly with Douglas's inability to deliver scripts until the last minute, but time ran away with them, and as the transmission date of the last episode of Series 1 loomed, the programme was in danger of not being made in time, and the show teetered on the brink of fiasco. On the day it had to go to air, Geoffrey and his editor, later his wife, Lisa Braun, were working frantically to get it ready, as Lisa remembers.
We were getting into a real panic. Geoffrey's assistant's husband did 2 trial runs to Broadcasting House in his car to see how long it would take to get to the place where the tape had to go out from. And then I managed to do the ultimate sin of catching the tape on the capstan, which is a little piece of the machinery that whirls around very fast, and it whirled all the tape up into a little ball. And we are now literally half an hour from transmission, and this is a terrible thing to unwind and to get it all straight. I don't know how we did it, but we got it to the transmission studio with literally minutes to spare. The continuity announcer was obviously just in a terrible state.
It's interesting that the show was recorded in the Paris studio, which of course is an audience venue. If it had had an audience, you wouldn't have been able to get away with what you did, because you would have had to have delivered, or Douglas would have had to have delivered the script in order for the audience to hear it. And it's an interesting thing that we recorded Blackadder, not many people know this, the first series was recorded without an audience, and Laughter then, it was shown to an audience afterwards. And we were just as disorganised on Blackadder as that first Hitchhiker series, and it's interesting that if either of them had been recorded with an audience, they probably would never have seen the light of day.
I think, quite honestly, the only reason it was recorded at the Paris was it actually had the best equipment at the time.
Lisa Braun, former BBC studio manager and widow of Geoffrey Perkins. The sound of The Hitchhiker's Guide was created by the BBC studio managers in the Paris Theatre and in the BBC's Radiophonic Workshop, famous for the Doctor Who theme, among many other audio creations. It was a painstaking business, as Douglas explained in 1985.
It was hard to stay sane doing that, particularly when you would be doing one 10-second sound effect, which would take you 2 days, buried in the subterranean studio beneath Lower Regent Street. And if it was something like the sound of a whale exploding on the ground, and you'd spent 2 days making this noise, it was very difficult to tell at the end of those 2 days, whether it was still funny or not.
Your planet is one of those scheduled for demolition. The process will take slightly less than 2 of your Earth minutes. Thank you very much. There's no point in acting all surprised about it. All the planning charts and demolition orders have been on display at your local planning department in Alpha Centauri for 50 of your Earth years, so you've had plenty of time to lodge any formal complaints, and it's far too late to start making a fuss about it now.
Simon, when he phoned me, said it's a very easy job, this. It's just the end of the world.
Paddy Kingsland, formerly of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, who worked on the first series.
I approached that with trepidation, but when the script arrived, there was a very, very detailed thing from Douglas on how he wanted the end of the world to sound, and there were things like barking dogs and railway crashes and all sorts of things like that, as it was sort of conjuring up the whole sort of chaos that would happen momentarily as the world fell apart. And I did put in a lot of those things. There was certainly screeching of railway trucks coming off the line and roaring, and volcanoes sort of started up and that sort of thing. But time was a bit short, so they had to cut half of it out on the final version.
On March the 8th, 1978, the first programme went on air.
The Hitch fans, and they were people who just simply didn't get it. And I remember I'd gone to a dinner party with some actor friends. I said, oh, I'm in this thing and I want to know what happens. So do you mind if we listen to it? It's at 10:30. And they said no. And I could tell after about 10 minutes that the kind of puzzled, slightly irritated look that they had. I thought, oh, this was a terrible mistake. Anyway, so I think I then had to catch it up with a repeat.
Mark Wing Davey, who played Zaphod Beeblebrox from episode 2 onwards. And where did Arthur Dent hear it?
Do you know, I really can't remember. It's one of those things I really should remember, like where you were when Princess Diana was killed, or when Kennedy was assassinated, or 9/11. Well, those are all ghastly and not very good comparisons, really, are they? But it is one of those things one ought to remember. I have an awful feeling I might have sat around the kitchen table with my completely uncomprehending parents when the first episode went out. My mother said, "That's very nice, dear."
How did the listeners react to this strange new show?
BBC always maintain, dare I say this on a BBC programme, that they knew immediately that it would become a cult, which was why they put it out at 10:30 on a Tuesday evening. Despite their efforts to consign it to oblivion, which you might consider that sort of slot to indicate, it was the time when people were making their cocoa or getting ready for bed or doing something last minute and had the radio on, and it hooked people extraordinarily. It was the first time a series was repeated immediately by public demand, because if you came in 2 episodes in, you thought, this is intriguing, I have no idea what's going on.
I thought it was good. I thought it was a kind of niche thing that would get a small audience, and it kind of took over. It was a phenomenon. It's one of those that the audience was always out there for it, but they hadn't been catered for, and it was a big word-of-mouth success. And Douglas was very...
to appear in committal proceedings in the Central Criminal Court on the 3rd moon of Achenar 15. These proceedings will be held on the 17th of April 2031 EC, Earth chronology. They cannot be held any earlier because the planet revolves on its axis once every 103 years, and it is now midnight local time.
The letter then goes on to accuse Douglas of many crimes, including
that you manufacture and sell the dangerous drug known as the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster. This drug is addictive, highly corrosive, and banned on most civilized planets, coming second in potency only to Syrian panther sweat. And that you did willingly and with knowledge before the fact capture or cause to be captured one of the protected species Piscatus psionyx, Babel fish.
And the fans then say they have enclosed a stamped addressed envelope for the scripts to be sent to them. Douglas then wrote back in May 1979 to say, "Thank you very much for your marvellous letter. I'm sorry to have been so long replying. Life has been hectic. No scripts are available as they are sub judice. However, a legally permissible novelisation will be available in October. Hope you enjoy it." When we looked at who wrote that fan letter, it turned out it was the work of a 15-year-old Andrew Lane, now well known as author of the Young Sherlock series of novels, who tells us that Douglas inspired his own career. He emailed to say, "I realise that part of me being a writer now and spending time going to schools and talking to kids about writing is thanks to the kindness shown me by Douglas Adams. In those days, writers and readers rarely interacted." The first Hitchhiker's novel was published in 1979 and was an adaptation of the first 4 radio shows. You probably wonder why the first novel was an adaptation of the first 4 radio shows. Well, one of the reasons was the last 2 of the 6 I'd co-written with Douglas Adams, and in the interim between the novel coming out and us finishing the series together, he'd given me the boot, which at the time was an absolutely horrific experience. We were very close friends. We'd written this thing together and we'd had the most amazing few months. We had 6 publishers chasing us. I think we were out for lunches. I mean, the idea at that age of whatever we were, 26 or something, being invited out to lunch by distinguished publishers was amazing. We thought our boat had come in. We're both going to be rich and famous and amazing. It was completely unexpected. Douglas had no expectation it was going to be any kind of a success, and nor did anyone else. Then we got commissioned by Pan Books to write a novel together. We got an advance together, and then Douglas thought the better of it and gave me the boot, so I say, which broke my heart at the time. I was extremely angry. I'm not going to mince words, but with hindsight, I think it was probably certainly the best thing that happened to me, and probably good for him as well too, because Douglas's voice is wholly original and different. It's not like anyone else's, and I'm a neat, tidy person. Probably he was right that his originality and freshness needed the loneliness and the pain that brought it to birth. And so parting company, that was difficult, but probably a good thing in the end.
We knew we had something special on our hands, and we kept our fingers crossed.
The first Hitchhiker's novel was commissioned by Nick Webb of Pan Books. Nick described his reaction to BBC Radio in 1980.
We printed 60,000 copies to start with in October, and since then we've sold another 200,000 copies almost. And we have another 50,000 copies being delivered to our warehouse today, and another 50,000 copies next month. So clearly, yes, we've been astonished by the book's success, but nevertheless delighted by it. It's the kind of publishing that we get the most pleasure out of, making a success out of something wholly, or at least partly unexpected, a cult success, at least in book publishing terms. Now that's an overworked phrase, but I think some of the qualities that one often finds in what we call cult books are clearly present in The Hitchhiker's Guide, because it's witty, it's satirical, but I think affectionately satirical of its traditional subject matter.
By 2005, it had sold over 14 million copies. Douglas had originally approached BBC Books, the BBC's publishing arm, who'd refused to take it, becoming probably the only publisher in the entire galaxy not to recognise its potential. Some years later, Simon Jones discovered that this was a source of some regret at the highest levels of the BBC when he was filming Brideshead Revisited at Castle Howard.
George Howard at the time, later Lord Howard, who owned Castle Howard, was chairman of the Board of Governors. And he came to me and said, what's this I hear about BBC Books not publishing The Hitchhiker's Guide? Why did Pan do it? And I said, because Douglas did approach them, apparently, and they didn't think there was any money to be made out of it. Could that be described as an embarrassing business decision? A bit like rejecting J.K. Rowling's manuscript, turning down Agatha Christie.
While the books were a worldwide hit, other spin-offs were not so successful financially. 2 albums sold slowly, but weren't backed by the BBC or a major record label. And when it transferred to the stage under the direction of maverick genius Ken Campbell, the show was critically well received and technically innovative, but commercially flawed, as Douglas explained.
The most fun was the original Ken Campbell one, the one where the audience was put on a hovercraft at the ICA, yes. Yeah, they got into the auditorium just after the Earth had been blown up, and sat on it, and it took off. There was nobody blacking out or anything, it only took off by 1/8 of an inch. But it was a significant 1/8 of an inch, in that it consisted entirely of air. Then the auditorium was just sort of pushed around, and with the audience sitting on top of it. And so there would be members of the cast sort of hanging by wires against the walls, Chris Langham and so on. Quite a terrifying experience. One of the problems with that production was that we were turning away something like 1,500 people a night, but only getting 80 people actually in, because that was all the airborne auditorium could take, and there were those who felt that this was the wrong way round.
Though Hitchhikers is clearly influenced by many previous generations of British comic writing, its genius is its invention. Hitchhikers is packed with ideas, not least its fictional science.
The Babel fish is small, yellow, leech-like, and probably the oddest thing in the universe. It feeds on brainwave energy, absorbing all unconscious frequencies and then excreting telepathically a matrix formed from the conscious frequencies and nerve signals picked up from the speech centers of the brain. The practical upshot of which is that if you stick one in your ear, you can instantly understand anything said to you in any form of language. The speech you hear decodes the brainwave matrix.
Douglas said that he invented the Babel fish because he didn't like the sci-fi tradition that everyone in the universe spoke English, more often than not, with an American accent. The way the Babel fish works has its own logic and pseudoscience. Real scientists love all that stuff. Here's Richard Dawkins, who became great friends with Douglas.
Science for him was the way in which you understand the world in which you live, the nature of the creature that you are, why you're here, why the world is here, why the world is what it is. And these obviously are rivetingly interesting, and a man of Douglas's intelligence could hardly fail to see that. I think that he was searching for the answer to the riddle of life, the universe, and everything.
Life, the universe, everything.
Tricky.
But can you do it?
Yes, I can do it.
You can!
There is an answer? A simple answer? Yes. Life, the universe, and everything. There is an answer.
Another science icon, Professor Stephen Hawking, is a fan and even takes a role in the new series.
What did you do to us?
As a pan-dimensional biohybrid organism, I infiltrated your dream cortexes and linked the neural pathways through a central server, that is to say, myself.
So you sent us to sleep and gave us a dream?
I gave you life for a long time.
He was very engaged in Darwinism, neuroscience, Apple computers. They all kind of melded.
Here's Mark Wing-Davey.
So he had this kind of combination of this kind of forward-looking imagination, but also that footlights comedic side of him, which was this quirky business about black holes where the biros or ballpoint pens went. That a lot of his observations, they kind of rang in a way which felt A, enormously well observed, and B, funny in a kind of way which was not forceful. In other words, he wasn't hitting you over the head with a joke. He was letting it kind of glance off, or if you laughed, you laughed.
It is comedy, and he was very good at comedy, as we know. But what he also was an omnivorous brain who could take science and the most abstruse ideas, and, weren't we lucky, had the time to indulge that, and human frailty and foibles and eccentricities, and weld it all together. The joy he takes in an intellectual idea while also seeing the humour of human beings exposed to this. I think it's the spine of an intelligence trying to make sense of the universe that gives it weight, gives it heft, so that it's not just fanning around the universe, if you forgive the expression.
Mark Wing-Davey and Jeff McGiven. Douglas was always keen to play down any serious side to his work, despite the often deadly serious questioning he faced from the media. Here he is in 1980 being quizzed about his second book, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, by the veteran writer and broadcaster Robert Key.
And there's quite a sort of mystical scene in The Restaurant at the End of the Universe where they get to the man who maybe has created the universe. One's left in doubt. But it seems as if you mind about something fairly mystical there, do you?
Well, in a way, I think the larger the issue, the better the jokes that become available to you, in a way. That's not to say that there isn't some sort of serious intent behind it, but I actually find I don't know what I think about anything until I find the right joke for it.
In 1999, the promise of a movie of Hitchhikers led Douglas to move from London to California. But 2 years later, at just 49, and before the film came to fruition, he suffered a fatal heart attack at his gym. It left his friends, including me, devastated.
Oh, terrible. And it affected us very badly. I mean, I sort of, even now, expect him to come into the room, you know.
Simon Jones.
I flew back. Well, I couldn't believe it. I flew back from Douglas's funeral in Santa Barbara on Delta Flight 42, and I only realised it when I looked at the ticket when I got off it, the other end. Didn't realise it was Flight 42. And 42 keeps cropping up wherever, you know. It's funny. That big NatWest tower that used to be in the city, I don't think it's NatWest anymore. That had 42 emblazoned across the side of it for quite a long period. I believe the man who owned it must have been a fan of Hitchhikers. I don't think it was number 42 of the street it was on. I don't think it came up in the script. I think we said, why 42? And he said, well, because it's funnier than 41 and 43. And he's right. But it is extraordinary how so much has entered the language. Life, the universe and everything. The answer to the ultimate question. Babelfish. He seemed to be really in sync with the developing computer technology at the time and people's enthusiasm for it. And he seemed to sort of carry it along with him. And what he wrote about just seemed to ignite other people's imagination.
Douglas would have loved all the possibilities of, communication through social media and that kind of thing. And I'm very sorry because, he died far too young, but I'm also sorry because he would really relished, and all the world that we're in now, fake news and that kind of thing. Douglas would have loved that. And he would have responded, I think, in a literary way to it.
40 years after the first broadcast of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on Radio 4, it's inspiring to think that these simple radio waves have now travelled right out across the actual galaxy from this small blue-green planet in an unfashionable backwater and will just have reached the newly discovered TRAPPIST-1 system by now. It sounds like a hitchhiker's name, doesn't it? But it isn't. And orbiting this star is a collection of Earth-sized exoplanets in the habitable zone that astronomers believe could support extraterrestrial life. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they had a population of beings with a sense of humour and at least one radio? Goodbye.
And then I have a theory about my name. We used to go to these things called proper carol singing at Douglas's place in Islington, which was all terribly glamorous with all his, famous friends, etc. But we would sing hymns in harmony and that kind of stuff. Douglas loved choral singing, loved it. But I had sung at my school an anthem called Zadok the Priest. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if those vowel sounds, A, O, sort of contributed in some subconscious way, because I'm sure he would have sung that anthem to Zaphod. Anyway, so that made me smile, and I thought, oh, perhaps there's something there for some footnote. My performance is really, doing it now, it feels like Donald Trump, frankly, at its worst. I think, oh my God, he is like this 6-year-old narcissist, Zaphod. But I think he's more enthusiastic and in the end has a better heart, certainly.
The character of Zaphod is a very interesting presidential construct, and I'll say no more to avoid controversy or libel writs. But Zaphod Beeblebrox is a president ahead of his time, whose time, I would suggest, is now.
2 heads ahead of his time.
Zaphod Beeblebrox is a president 2 heads ahead of his time.